9.
Is it
9. Thank you very much. Right? It's 3 possibilities for the first one, and for each one of these, the other guy can be 3 of, can be 3 things. Right? We have 9 total possibilities. It's pretty cool that just with the 2 short statements we can eliminate 8 of the 9 possibilities, and basically be certain that they can only be normals. So if you, you can draw, write out all the possibilities, and you can see that each one of those can be eliminated except for the one where they're both normals, which is pretty cool. All right, any questions about this? Are we buying it? Okay. All right, now let's, we're going to say goodbye to the knights and knaves and say hello to the lion and the unicorn. Check it out and see what you guys can come up with over here. Are we ready to move on? Okay. All right, so let's pick up where we left off last time. We were talking about credit scores and how awesome they are, or something to that effect. All right. The credit score will have an impact in a lot of different areas. Right? For one, we already discussed that it will affect the interest rate that you can get on your loans. Right? And the reason is because the credit score is an indicator of your default probability, right? And the higher the probability of default, the higher the interest rate the lender will require in order to compensate himself for the risk that is inherent in making a loan, right? I recall at some point in the past we were discussing vanilla loan shark example, right? You guys recall that? Maybe you did. Maybe it was another name, but it was a loan shark, right? You guys recall that? You know, that he's making, he has a portfolio of loans, and he has a particular an expectation that a certain percentage of them will default, right? And he is going to set an interest rate such that even after all defaults, he's making the interest rate that he wants to make, right? And so remember, like in our example, we said, let's say, for example, he's making 1,000 loans at $100 each. He wants, say, he wants to earn a 10% interest rate after all is said and done, right? And so the question is, what interest rate must he stake on his loans in order to make a net 10% return, even considering that some of these guys are going to default and not, he's going to not going to see his money, right? So if you make the assumption the default rate is, for example, let's say 5%. So that means that 50 of your 1,000 loans are just not going to return any money at all. You're going to be losing that money, right? Now, if he still wants to make a 10% return, he must set the interest rate that is higher than 10%, right? In order to make up for the guys who are going to not repay the loan, right? So what interest rate is he going to set? All right, well, we're going to say, okay, so he has a $1 million, no, 100,000. Let's make it $1,000, around $1 million out of a loan portfolio, right? And so he knows that he wants to make, at the end of the period, he wants this $1 million to turn into 10% more than $1 million. Ultimately has $1.1 million, right? And so he says, well, but I know that 5% of my guys are going to default. So how am I going to be producing this $1 million? Well, what's going to happen is that I have 1,000 loans, and I only get 95% of these back. Right? And the guys that do repay me, they're going to pay me how much? Well, they're going to pay me 1,000 times 1 plus whatever interest rate I'm charging. Right? Hopefully, I know that I'm not going to charge them 10% because then I'll be losing money, right? So I'm going to charge them some unknown interest rate, right? I'll have to figure out what that is, right? And the rest of the guys, 5% of them, are going to give me the big fat zero, right? And then I'll have to send my enforcer with the bat, hunting bat, and choose that other guy to work, or something like that. Right? But I'm not expecting to be able to recover the money. And we can look at complicate this and say that we expect to recover like 50 cents on the dollar or whatever, which is not really about, right? So this is a setup, right? This is how I'm going to make $1.1 million. So now I need to figure out what is this rate in order for me to make $1.1 million, right? So far so good. Do you have any questions? Is the setup making sense? Right, so only 950 guys are going to repay, and the other 50 guys are didn't, right? So we have an equation with one unknown, that being the interest rate. We can of course solve for this interest rate, right? So in this case, let's see what happens, right? So now 1.1 million divided by 950. The guys, and of course, we're going to 1,000 times the return, and this is the number of guys, right? Now you guys pay attention, I was missing a whole 1,000 factors there. Right, so this is 950 guys, and they're each paying 1,000 times 1,000, and the other guys are paying, right? So, 150 times 1,000, right? Now you can 50. Right? So what is this going to have to be? then right away your expectation should be that this is going to be something more than a 10% interest rate, right? Because otherwise you're not making any dollars. So our interest rate is 1 plus the rate, 1.1 by rate, so our interest rate is 2.8%. Right? So if we're anticipating a 5% rate of default, and our target profit is 10%, we'll have to charge 15.8% interest rate. Right? Now the higher the anticipated rate of default, I mean, what do you think is the relationship between the rate we must charge and the rate of default? That's right, there's a direct relationship, right? The more default we anticipate, the higher must be the stated rate in order to make up for all the debt, right? So, for example, we say, well, imagine that our default is not 5%, but is in fact 10%. What interest rate must we charge? Well, remember, the default rate is units, so 950 guys are paying, which would be $900, right? If it's 10% instead of 5%. Right, so in this case, what is the interest rate that's coming out of that? Now we're starting 22%. Right? So the same thing, the bank is, well, they're not the loan shark, but they're making loans to a bunch of different people. Right? And so they say, okay, we have a bunch of loans that we made to people with low risk of default. Right? So these are the guys with like high credit score. Okay, so the guy, this pool of loans with the guys with good credit score and low risk of default. So in order to make my desired net interest rate, I only have to charge them a relatively small interest rate, right? So there's not a lot of default rate. Now we have this other pool of loans with credit scores that are not so good. Right? So maybe the really good guys, the rate of default is like 0.5%. Maybe the next guy, the rate of default is like 3%. So we're going to again figure out what interest rate we must charge will be something higher. Then we have these other guys, probably like really bad credit rating. So their rate of default is maybe 10%. So we must charge them a much higher rate in order to still make our money, right? So we must make up for all the things. Right? Is making sense? And so, this is the logic by which, when you go out and try to get a loan, they look at your credit score, and if the lower your credit score, that means the higher the probability that you will default, and that means they're going to charge you a higher rate in order to make up for the expectation of default. Right? Okay. Any questions? All right. Okay, and now besides that, if your credit score is low enough, at some point they might just say, you know what, we're not going to bother, right? But at some point you might not even be able to get a loan in the first place, right? Because at some point they're going to say, well, the rate of default, risk of default is so high on this guy that we'll have to charge him like a 50% interest rate, and it will be such a high interest rate that he'll be even less likely to default, right? I mean, even more likely to default, because you have to give us even more money, and then it's hard for him to give money, right? And so at some point they say, it's just not worth it, we're not going to deal with guys who have such a high probability of default. Right? So you don't want to be down in the dumps of perceived default rate, because you'll have trouble, getting access to credit in the first place, right? Now, being in the middle is pretty bad too, because you'll be paying a higher interest rate, right? But basically, you want to try to manage your credit score in such a way that you don't have to risk it, right? So it's looking like a deadbeat is bad for you. Now, besides loans and interest rate, credit scores also affect your insurance rate. Now, because insurance companies have discovered, well, it's not really a surprising discovery, that people who are responsible enough to manage their credit and make the payments and have a good credit score are also less likely to screw their shit up, right? They're more careful drivers, they don't leave their, they don't leave their gas burner on and they go outside and play with their children and then like the stove explodes. Basically, they're more careful with their stuff, right? They're more responsible people. And so as a result, when you go and try to get insurance codes, like you try to get a car insurance, or you try to get renter's insurance, or you try to get home insurance, right? Your insurance rates, your insurance premiums are going to be affected by what your credit score is. If you have a bad credit score, you're going to have to pay more for exactly the same insurance coverage as somebody who has a high credit score, right? So that would kind of suck, right? You don't want to pay more for the same stuff that the guys with the high credit score are paying, right? So that's another reason that you really want to sort of it's just a general concept that you want to be cognizant of what you're doing. You want to be careful with managing your credit, managing your stuff, just because it's good for you all around, right? And when everybody else sees that you know what you're doing, they're willing to give you a better price on stuff, right? So it's a good idea to have a good credit score. Now, it even goes so far as affecting your employment opportunities, because again, for the same reasoning, and employers have figured out is that hey, people who are careful in managing their stuff make more responsible employees. So why don't we go and run a credit check on all our job applicants, and we'll use that as a factor in our hiring decision, right? And so, in fact, if your credit score is particularly low, you might even have trouble getting a good job. So, the employers are going to say, we're going to credit check all our potential employees to make sure they're not deadbeats and responsible wackos. So, we can run a credit check, right? And so, then they say, okay, we'll have this guy. And I have this guy, and it seems pretty reasonable. It seems good. We don't know, it does seem all right. We interviewed and whatever. And one of them has a high credit score, and the other one has a low credit score. Well, we're not going to take this guy, we're going to take this guy, right? Yeah.
Isn't that like a violation of the privacy?
I mean, in some states, they have made laws that limit the use of credit scores for the purposes of employment. But that's only a dozen states out of 50. I'm not sure if New Jersey is one of those states. That's what you figure out. But in general, right, it's possible. And still, it limits it to a certain extent, but it doesn't, depending on what the state is, it does not necessarily completely prohibit it. Because when you go and apply for it, they can say, well, we want, as a condition of offering you employment, we would like to ask you to run a credit check. You say no, and then, then we don't want to hire you, right? Unless they otherwise are really interested. But in general, again, depending on the state, etc., and I'm not sure what all the details of the different state laws are, right? But it can have an effect. So just another reason to not default on it. Right? That makes sense. So it's you don't want to end up down at the bottom of the credit score because it becomes harder to get out because you're paying higher rates on your loans. It's harder to get a job. You're paying more for your insurance. So basically, once you're there, it's like a downward spiral. It becomes hard. It's hard to get out once you have slid down the bottom of the bill. Right? That makes sense. Anyone have any other questions? Okay. So we're all going to be responsible with our credit, right? Awesome. Now, as far as the components, right, the credit score is not perfect, right? It is, to some extent, it is possible to game it a little bit, but not completely, right? So one of the primary component is your payment history, right? So they see that you have a credit card, you've made all your payments on time. They see that you have student loans, you made your payments on time, car loans, etc. Right? The payment history, or the major component, accounts for 30 to 40% of the weight in the total credit score. Right? The other component is actually credit utilization. Now, what does it mean, credit utilization? It basically means what fraction of your available credit lines you currently are using. Right? So for example, if you have, credit cards with, say, $10,000 in total credit limit, and you're currently using like $1,000, then your credit utilization ratio is 10%, right? So you're using 10% of your available extended credit, right? But, if you have, $10,000 of available credit and you're using 8,000 worth, that's an 80% credit utilization. And that's kind of a warning sign. They're saying, this guy is using a lot of his available credit, right? So you could be getting close to not being able to repay or something like that, right? So how can we increase our credit utilization? One way is to just not use so much of our available credit. But another way is to increase the amount of available credit, right? So for example, if I have like one credit card with a credit limit of $5,000, and then maybe I'm using, say $3,000, that credit utilization is 60%. Well, I could either repay some of the 3,000, or I could apply for another credit card and apply for a credit utilization. And if I increase my available credit from 5 to 10,000, then now I have to just reduce my credit utilization to 30%. Right? And so as a result, my credit utilization goes down, and that should positively affect my credit. Right? So it's kind of, it's not, it's kind of a perverse incentive a little bit. Right? You don't want, like, if you have a bunch of loans, you don't want to get even more credit capacity necessarily. But this is it is the way it is. So it's not not really a perfect indicator, but there is other components that enter into it as well. It's like the length of your credit history, or the length of your credit accounts. Different types of credit, like having a revolving credit account, like a credit card, plus like a car loan, plus like a home mortgage that you're all on time with, is like good for you, right? And another interesting thing is the number of recent credit inquiries, right? Because actually, it's what happens is that if you're trying to borrow more money, and like you go around and you apply for a bunch of credit cards, all of those credit cards are going to do an inquiry of like what your credit report is looking like, right? And so if they see that there's a lot of credit inquiries, that's kind of like a little bit of a red flag. They're like, hey, this guy is trying to borrow more money right now, right? So it kind of tries to make it a little more difficult to say, hey, I have decent credit. I'm going to apply for like 20 different credit cards at the same time. And because everybody is looking and says I'm okay, they're going to give it to me, but then I end up having like a lot more credit than I should, right? So if you kind of do that, the first one is going to do a poll, second one is going to do a poll, and now there is somebody who just had a recent poll. The third one is going to say you just had 2 recent polls, right? Yes.
What's the point of trying to get
Oh, I don't know. Some people are crazy, they're gonna some people they have like dozens of credit cards. It's like they get one, then they can pay it off. They get another one and use it to do a balance transfer to pay this one off, and then they have it over here, right? And they do this sort of juggling trick. Basically it's like they're trying to postpone the inevitable, right? So it's like once somebody is in trouble and he's not able to pay off all his loans, you're going to try anything you can in order to to stay afloat, right? And so you might say, I've been paying some interest rate on this card, but I just got this offer of low interest balance transfer or something, right? So I'm just going to take the balance from this card where I'm paying 15% and transfer it to this card where I'm paying 7%. I mean, that's not a bad idea. But ideally, you wouldn't be carrying any credit card balance in the first place, right? And if you already are carrying it, it's not a bad idea. But then, the interest rate, the low interest offer expired. What am I going to do? And now my debt is even more, right? Because I transferred the balance and then I kept using this card. Now I have even more. I need a third card, to do the balance transfer, right? It kind of snowballs from there. Yeah, I mean, you'd be surprised. You don't want to be there, but people. Some people kind of get in trouble with there's the easy access to credit and forget that they actually are supposed to pay it off. Right, looking good, and we're like, swipe, fine. It doesn't feel like you're spending money, but turns out you are. Okay? So, but yeah, so that's sort of some those things that I wanted to tell you about credit. So, if you want, to get, like, when you have, like, initially when you have absolutely no credit, you have just like, there's no record, right? So if you want to build a credit score, it's fine. You get a credit card and use it to buy stuff, whatever. But you don't want to pay any interest on the card, right? Because like right now, again, if you're like a student and you're getting your first credit card, the interest rate they're going to charge you is going to be like in the 20% range, right? Paying 20% interest is really bad for you, right? Not a good place to be. So if you get a card, you get your 1 month grace period, right? Because when you spend some money on the card, you don't get charged interest in it until the next billing period, right? So let's say we have draw a timeline. Right, so let's say here we have time 0, right? We have time 1, linear months, right? So what's going to happen, right, is you're going to spend some money in the first month, right? And so then the credit card, and in the meantime, then you spend some money here, right? So what's going to happen is that there is a delay between when you spend money and when you can pay it without paying interest, right? So you're going to spend some money, during this month, and then the credit card is going to send you a billing statement. They're going to say you spend $500, right? So this is your outstanding balance on the card. And you have until this time to pay it off without any right? So if you pay the entire $500 by the due date of the first billing statement, there's absolutely no interest being charged on your $500, right? But they're doing, so the statement say you spent $500, right? So you can pay it off right now. That's fine, you pay it, right? Or but the minimum payment you can make is like 20 or something like that. Okay, right? So if you don't want to pay the whole thing right now, you just send it $20. You'll be fine. Right? So it sounds like a pretty good deal, right? But if you do that, you send them the $20, you're going to then use your balance, carry over balance, you're going to be 480, and then for the next month, they're going to accrue 20% interest on the $480. All right? And so if you keep making only the minimum payments, you're going to be carrying a bunch of balances and be paying 20% or whatever, 22%, 25%, right? When you were a student, you would jack the rate. My interest rate on the card was like 7%, right? But a few years ago, it was like 20%, right? And so, but even 7% I don't want to pay, right? 7% is a good interest rate. It's the rate that I want to earn. It's not the rate I want to pay, right? So this is the thing, if you use your credit card, make sure you can pay off the balance every month, so you don't end up paying interest, right? But it's a great deal if you have the difficulty to pay off the balance every month and not pay interest. Then you get some free credit. You get that wall of protection that you discussed, you can use the process, right? You get some convenience, you don't have to carry on cash, but you don't pay interest. So it's like awesome. But if you pay the interest, then you're getting screwed. Yes.
How does that compare to how affect your credit score when you pay a minimum as opposed to paying whole minimum?
Now, one thing that it does, right, is that it affects your credit utilization ratio, right? Because what happens is that if you carry this 480, let's say your credit limit is, I don't know, $1,000 on the card or whatever, then your credit utilization is 50%, right? So then the next month you can spend some more, right? And eventually you're gonna run out of credit limit, so you'll have to keep paying whatever, right? You're gonna be paying interest in it. So one way it will affect you is through more credit accumulation, which is bad, right? But generally, as long as you make timely payments, it's fine, right? It's just bad for you financially to be paying 20% interest on the loan, right? So the really bad part comes if you are late on a payment or if you miss a payment. And then that's like a big red flag on your credit report. Hey, this guy missed a payment. Watch out. Some stuff that doesn't hit the fan. Alright, so it's fine if you make timely payments, but you're going to eventually run out of credit balance. If you keep spending money, right, and paying minimum payments, you'll run out of credit limit. And in the meantime, you're paying interest rates. So we really don't want to do that. Right? Whatever you spend on the card in any given month, you should be prepared to pay off by the very next credit statement so you pay money. Right? You don't get any bonuses for paying interest to the credit card. Right? So you don't get an extra awesome credit history because you pay the minimum payment and pay interest on the balance of the credit card. Right? There's no bonus for that. It's just the money you have. Now, okay, sometimes you might end up saying, oh, I'm low in cash, right? And I cannot afford to pay. Well, in that case, no choice. You gotta do what you gotta do, right? But ideally, you never want to do that. You don't want to be spending money that you do not have, right? So you use a credit card as a tool, as a convenience mechanism, but don't use it as a mechanism to actually borrow money for the long term. Not something like it. Right? So, it seemed like, with the $500, it's not a big deal. So over a year, 20% interest is like what? An extra $100, right? But, $100 is $100. Right? And if you have a higher credit limit, you're paying more, and you're paying more. And it's really hard. Alright, so just to come back to your plan to put part of your computer on a credit card and pay minimum payment, you don't want to do that. If you don't have enough money for the whole thing, you're better off borrowing an extra $500 from your parents and say, I'll pay you 1% interest. Now, you'll be happy with that. That's really bad, right? Better to pay 1% than 22% or whatever. Alright? So, if you want to have a card, you don't want to. Okay? Any questions? All right. All right, now let's see what's next. All right, so this is something I wanted to discuss for as far as financial decision making goes. All right, so we are going to figure out which one of these alternatives is better for us by seeing in which case we end up with more money at the end. Right? That's basically the idea. You see, am I going to be better off at the end if I do this, or am I going to be better off at the end if I do something else, right? So we want to consider all the factors. We want to consider the prevailing interest rate that we can earn on the money that we might be not spending if we are saving some money up front versus later, right? We basically want to take into account all the factors. So for this particular hypothetical setup, these are the factors we're considering, right? So we're buying like a $20,000 car. All right, if we lease the car, we have to put down $600 security deposit, which is going to be sitting there, right? And then we'll pay $425 per month for 3 years, which is how many months? 30. Okay, good. Just making sure you guys are awake. Okay, so if we buy, then we'll pay $2,400 a down payment right now, and we pay $515 per month on the loan. We pay a 6% sales tax up front on the price of the car. And at the end, we have a $7,000 residual value for the car, right? When we lease, there is no residual value because we just basically rented the car, and when we're done, we just give it back. There's nothing left. When we buy, we have a vehicle, a used car that has a residual value, right? And we're assuming that the investment rate of return we can get in the meantime is 5%. So then the question is, which way are we better off, right? And we're assuming that there are no other factors, but we can of course include other factors if we want to, right? But for now, this is what we're going to play around with, and then you can tweak the different numbers and see how they affect our decision. Yes.
What's the investment rate? I understand it's 5%, but what is that? How much after you sell it, you're going to get back?
Investment rate of return, that means if you're saving some money, right? What are you going to do with that? Right? Are you going to stick it in your mattress? Hopefully not. You're probably going to put it somewhere that gives an investment. So for example, like we're saying, if we lease, we have to pay $600 right now. But if we buy, we have to pay $2,400 right now. So when we lease, that means we're saving an extra $1,800 that we get to keep. All right? What are we going to do with that? We're going to invest it. Right? So that's the idea. So of course, your investment rate of return will vary depending on, what your cash flow situation is like. Like if you're using your last bits of cash, you're probably not going to be putting the money, the extra money you're saving into your long-term investment portfolio. It'll probably just sit in your bank and be used to buy groceries, right? So in that case, your investment rate of return will be approximately 0, right? Whereas if you're saying I have, I have plenty of cash cushion, so any extra money I have, if I have more cash, I'm just going to fill up my investment portfolio, right? Because I already have plenty of other cash sitting around. Then you're going to get a different investment return, right? So this is the idea. So let's see how we're going to do this. So the simplest, there are many ways, to consider it. At the end of the day, it all comes out to the same thing. Our framework is going to be like this. So we'll say, okay, let's imagine that, what are my, so look at the lease alternative, right? What are going to be my cash outflows, right? So we have a stream of cash outflows happening over the next 3 years. So we'll say, imagine I don't have this outflow. How much money do I end up with? And then we'll look at the cash flows for buying. And we'll say, imagine I don't have that outflow. How much money do I end up saving by the end? Right? And so then we say, whichever one is better to not have is the one that we don't want. Right? So let me just build up a spreadsheet with that so you guys can see and take a look. So let's take a look. So we have lease 600 security up front, 425 a month for 3 years, and then we're done. Right? There's nothing else. So let's open up a spreadsheet here. You guys see that? Right? We're going to be doing this over 36 months. So our timeline is going to be from 1 to 36, right? That's our timeline. Right? Timeline, right? And so our cash flows for leasing, right? There we go. Right, so our cash flows are at time 0, which is today. We have to put down the $600, right? So that's $600 right now. And then at the end of every month, we have to put down 425. Right? So that'll be 425, and we'll just put it down for the 36 months. Right? So these are our cash flows for lease. This is just the cash flows at the time that they will occur. Right? So now we'll say, okay, if I don't if I don't have to do that, I would take this money and invest it at 5% interest rate, right? That's where our investment return comes in. And if I don't have to do that, right, I'll take this money and put it in some investment. So what will be the amount of money that I will have saved by the end of 3 years? Yes?
I have another question. Wouldn't you add 425 to the lease, for 600? From that time, it's a 50.
Oh, no, the security deposit is the thing that you have to put down up front, right? And then you make your lease payments at the end of every month, right? So this is the first thing, like you have to give them $600 right now. And then after the first month, they'll send, basically, then you'll take out, you'll send them, every month they'll send you a billing statement and say, you owe us for $125, right? Yes.
Can you send this Excel sheet to us?
Well, when we're done with it,
Yeah.
we're making it as we go along. But I will post it on Blackboard. Yeah. And yes, it will be useful for your project. Right, so then we're going to say, so what is going to be, what is going to be the future value of each one of these payments? Yes.
It's going to be the payment between those with lease and 1.2
Right, exactly. So for this 600, if we were to not have to pay it right now and put it in our investment, right, it would be invested at 5% per year, right, in our investment. So, assuming that the 5% is an APR rate, that means that per month we're going to get 5% divided by 12, right? So the monthly rate is 1/12 of that, right? So we're going to grow this 600 if we didn't have to pay it. Right? We're going to grow at 1 plus this interest rate for 36 months. Right? This to come back to our present value, future value discussion. Right? So I come back to the first month, it will grow by a little bit. At the second month, it will grow by a little bit again, etc., etc. That will happen for 36 periods until we end up at the end of 3 years. Right? Any questions so far regarding that? Okay. So now before we do that, we don't want to hard code our interest rate because we're going to tweak it later. So let me just insert a couple of columns here. There we go. And so we'll have another one. So our parameters, right? This is our annual interest rate on investments, right? And so that will be 0.05, right? 5%. Okay, let's see. Yeah, I guess for now, that's the only thing we're worried about. At this point, we could probably even say that if our annual rate is 5%, we'll just write this as APR, right, the annual percent rate. That means that our monthly rate, rate per month, monthly rate, is going to be equal to that divided by 12, right? So some monthly interest rate. So this is the rate we're going to be using to accrue investment return every month, right? So now what happens with the 600, right? This 600 is going to grow at 1 plus the monthly interest rate, right? And this is going to grow for 36 periods, right? From times 0 to times 36, right? So we'll raise it to the power of 36 minus 0, right? Because of course every one is going to grow by a smaller and smaller number of periods, right? So this grows by 36 minus 0, which is 36. This one will grow by 36 minus 1, which is 55, and so on and so forth, right? So like, we're constructing a vector of interest statements that, as we did with when we were playing around with R and doing simulations, now we're just doing the same thing with Excel. Yes?
You need to make B2 an attribute.
Yes, we do. I was just going to get to that before we fill it down. But I'm glad you're with it. Awesome. All right, so this is what the 600 is going to turn into if we were to invest it at 5% for 3 years, right? So it happens to be 696. Okay? Any questions so far? All right. Now, before we fill this down, we have to make this a fixed reference, as we said, right? Because when we fill things, generally these cell references are relative reference. So it says here, 36 minus D2, which is this. But what really is, right, it displays it, what it really is, it is 2 cells to the left, it has to do with a relative reference. It's just displayed as B2 so we know which one it is. But really, like when the spreadsheet is looking at this, it is saying, take, start from here and go 2 cells to the left. So that means when we fill it down to all the rest of the rows, it's not going to be stuck referencing this cell. It's going to be referencing each of these successive cells, right? Which is exactly what we want. But we don't want for the reference to B2, the monthly rate, to be shifted. Because all of these cells have nothing in them. Right? So we want to lock in this reference to precisely this cell. So it is not a relative reference, but an absolute reference. Right? Now, in order to do that, we just put some $signs around the cell name. Right? And that way, the spreadsheet will know that this is supposed to be an absolute reference. Right? Now, you can actually separately log the row and the column. In this case, it doesn't matter. So, make an absolute reference to this cell. Right, so now when we fill this down for all of these, 36. There it is, right? So you can see this 491 is, we're growing at this monthly rate for 36 minus 1, which is 35 periods. Right? And so on and so forth, like we can pick any cell, right? Here it is, we're growing at the monthly rate for 36 minus 16, which is 20 periods, right? And so on and so forth. So that means that if we don't have this lease on our hands, we are saving a sum of all of these monthly payments, right? So let's just run sum and a sum of all of that stuff. So we're saving $17,000. We end up with $17,000 extra in our investment portfolio. Right? Make sense? Any questions so far? Yes.
What do you mean by this investment? What does that mean?
Well, basically, if we don't have to pay this money to the lease guy, right? We're going to take this money and invest it in our investment portfolio, and we assume that we can get 5%, right?
What does that do?
Which, I mean,
Investment
portfolio. Maybe that your investment portfolio for this money is just your bank account, right? And so in that case, your rate of return will be your 1% interest rate in your savings account, right? Hypothetically, we assume that wherever we're going to stash the money, it's going to earn us 5%, right? So maybe we're going to stick extra money in our mutual funds, right? And maybe we're going to stick the extra money in our I bonds, right? Or whatever. We're going to stick it somewhere that's earning a rate of return, right? So, if we do not pay that, we do not pay this 425 at this time, right? We do not pay it. We're going to take it and stick it in our investment. It could be, it could be a mutual fund, it could be a stock, it could be an I bond, could be a savings account, but it is something that's giving us a rate of return, right? And in this problem, we assume that the rate of return we're getting from our investment is 5%. We can tweak that rate to be anything we want, right? So just hypothetically, we just make up 5% for now, right? But you can change that to whatever you want.
So if I invest in 5%,
So basically, if you take all of this money, and like every month you put that much money into your investment, which is earning 5%, and at the end you will end up with 17,000 something in that portfolio, right?
Okay.
Or 17,000 extra, right? Plus whatever you might have had there before, it doesn't matter, right? So if we take all of that money and keep it, instead of paying it, we keep it and invest it 5%, in the end of 3 years, we end up with $17,000, right? Okay, does everybody else have any questions? All right. So it's important that you all are clear what's going on. So appreciate it for asking the question. So now, of course, we're going to do the same thing with the buy cash flows, right? So what happens with the buy cash flows? So buy cash flows. What are our buy cash flows? So first of all, we're going to put 2,400 down, right? So we have to pay 2,400 right now at time 0. All right, so 2,400. Right, before we do that, I have to pay some more stuff later, right? We also have to pay a 6% sales tax on the purchase price of the car. Right, so that's 20,000 times 6%. Right, what is that? You're going to have 1,200 bucks. Right, 1,200 bucks. All right. So we're also going to have to pay 1,200 bucks as tax, which is also a cash outflow right up front. So what else we have there? Yes, we have a 7,000 residual value that happens at the end. We haven't gotten to that yet. Okay, so that's our cash outflow up front. Then each month we're going to pay $515 per month, right? So we're going to put down 515, fill it down. There it is. Now what else happens? And then we get $7,000 residual value, right? Which means that at the end we can sell the car and get $7,000, right? Make sense? So that means if we do not do this, then we do not get the $7,000 at the end, right? So here we're saying, if we do not buy the car, we get to not pay $3,600, so we keep $3,600. Get to not pay $500, so we get to keep it, etc. But that means at the end we do not get the $7,000, right? So that means that we're going to, at the end, subtract $7,000 from what we would get if we were buying a car, right? So minus the $7,000. Right? So now is this making sense, right? We're looking to see what would our cash flows be if we do not do that, right? So as a result, we do not get the $7,000 at the end. That's why that's a negative number. Because we don't want to add the $7,000 because we wouldn't be getting it, right? We want to know, we are looking for the value of not doing that, right? So again, we calculate the future value, right? And that will be this times 1 plus our monthly interest rate raised to the power of 36 minus 5. Right? So our initial 3,600 will be 4181. Again, we're going to fix the reference to cell B2, right? We don't even have to fix the column. Right, we're going to fill this down. We're going to add all these up. And there we go. So if we do not lease, we end up with 17,167. If we do not buy, we end up with 17,139. So what would you rather not do? I would rather not lease. Now in this case, as it happens, the numbers have come out relatively close, right? And we should say that we're indifferent, right? Because an extra, what is that? 30 bucks or so over 3 years doesn't really make or break anything, right? It's probably within margin of error for our expected rate of investment return, right? But this is the idea, right? I just made up these numbers. I didn't run the numbers before class, so I didn't know how close it would come out, right? I just made up some numbers, and it turns out that we're pretty different. right? But that's not necessarily going to be the case, right? So, for example, we could say, assume that we are going to, right? So it's pretty indifferent. But the important thing is, right, we would rather not lease, right? Because if we do not lease, we keep more money than if we do not buy. Right? So that means if you need a car, we're going to buy, right? Because we'd rather not lease. Make sense? Any questions? This is like the important part here, right? This is the decision. Yes.
Like if you decided to pay it off each month, could you just add
Right, pay what off?
like you said it costs like $5.15 a month.
Yeah.
So if you just paid $5.15 a month without like the interest rate or whatever, you do that.
Which interest rate? What do
You
you...
said the investment.
Oh, so we can assume that we have no investment return? We're just sticking the money in our mattress? We can do that.
Well, don't you have to pay each month? Or you pay it
No, I mean, we make these payments every month if we buy, right? So every month we pay $5.15. But if we do not buy, we get to keep that money. Right? So that's the question. Would we rather keep this money or would we rather keep this money? That's our question, right? Yes.
I think she's going back to what you said before about how with the credit cards, when you have the balance, if you pay it within that 1 month period, then you don't have to pay interest on it.
Right.
You have that entire loan taken out at once, and you're paying it off $515 a month. It's not like you're taking out $515 a month.
Yeah, I mean, right. This is we're paying off the loan on the car. So the car was worth $20,000. The down payment was $2,400. That means the principal of the loan is whatever we didn't put down, right? So it's $20,000 minus $2,400 is $17,600. We just took out a $17,600 loan, and we're just paying it off over time, over 36 months. We can actually figure out what is the implied interest rate on the loan that we're paying, right? Which is actually the next thing we're going to talk about, annuities and loan amortization, if we get to that, which we may have to. Right, so if we say, what if we just pay off the loan every month? Well, to pay off the loan, we have to give them $17,600, because that is the loan that we took, right, for the value of the car. Make sense? Sort of.
Not really, but I don't know how to explain it.
Right? I mean, when we buy the car, what happens, and we don't have, I mean, we can do two things, right, when we buy the car. One thing we can do is say, here is $20,000 in cash, give me the car. Right? And then the guy will say, here you go. Well, plus the 6% sales tax, that kind of stuff. But anyway, right? Or you can say, you know what, I don't have $20,000 to give you right now. I'll give you $2,400 and borrow the rest and pay you over time. Right? And so this is where the car loan payments come from, because we borrowed $17,600 from the guy, and we're repaying that $17,600. Right? In order not to have that loan, we had to have given him the whole $20,000 up front. Okay? Make sense? All right. So in this case, we're pretty indifferent, but we could say, what if, let's say, what if I have a good diversified investment portfolio, and I'm really expecting, the historical average market rate of return of 10%. If that's what I'm doing, what is better? So I can tweak the interest rate that I'm planning to get on my investment, right, on the money that I keep, and see what happens. So if that is the case, then each of these cash flows that you get to keep will grow a little faster. And so in that case, what's happening? Right now, what happens is that we would rather not buy. Because when we buy, apparently, most of that comes from the fact that if we'd rather not buy, we get to save this large initial investment cash flow, right? That would have grown at 10%. And all of these cash flows here, they're all larger, right? And so the investment return is, affecting all of these cash flows by a lot more, right? Well, because the cash flows are larger. And so in this case, we'd rather not buy. Because if we do not buy, we end up with $19,000 in our investment. Or if we do not lease, we end up with $18,500. So basically, it's a difference of $1,000. In that case, we'd rather lease and pay less money up front and less money throughout time, and basically we're going to be saving the rest of 10%. Right? Now the other thing we could say is, you know what? I'm kind of I don't have an investment portfolio. I just have a little bit of money in the bank. So if I were not spending this money, I'd probably be just sticking it into my bank savings account, right? And if I'm careful with what interest rates I get, maybe I'll stick it in some online bank at 1%. Or if I just have an account with Wells Fargo, I'm like getting 0.05%, which is like 0. Right? So what do you guys want to get? 0.05% or 1%? And we can try both. One? Okay, let's try 1%. So our interest rate is 0.01 now, right? So we're getting 1% on next best alternative. And so in this case, we'd rather not lease, right? We're going to buy. Because when we do not lease, we keep 16, and we do not buy, we get 15.5. So you can see how the assumption of what we're going to do with the money that we do not pay has an effect on what the correct decision is, right? And so I guess I was pretty lucky with my number choice. That's good. We have a change in decision depending on the next best alternative. Now, it's not necessarily always going to be this close. Sometimes you run the numbers, and it'll just be completely clear that one alternative is better than the other, regardless of what little tweaks you make, right? But in this case, it's relatively close, and so all things considered, it's just not all that important which one you do at the end of the day, right? Sometimes it will have a more serious impact, right? So we want to have this analysis tool to make sure that we're not throwing money out to the wind if we do not have to, right? So, any questions so far? Is this making sense? Okay. So, and another, I mean, I think this is like more straightforward to just take each one individually and see which one is better for you not to do, right? But it is possible to analyze, the two together and just look at the differences in cash flows every period, right? And then to see if those differences are, what those differences add up to at the end after we account for all the investment return and all that other stuff, right? So for example, if we look at here, right? So cash flow difference, CFD, right? And so we'll say, okay, so what are the cash flow differences of, say, leasing versus buying, right? So if it turns out that we decide to buy instead of lease, right, we're going to be paying an extra we're going to be $3,600 up front instead of $600. That's like an extra $3,000, right? So we'll just say, the cash flow difference is, 600 minus 3,600. And we're going to fill these down, right, for the whole 36 months, right? Make sense? Right? So now we're just comparing them directly, right? Instead of just comparing, not doing each one separately, we can compare them directly, like these are the cash flow differences. We get to save an extra 3,000 if we lease. We get to save an extra 90, an extra 90, etc., right? But at the end, right, we get an extra 7,000 minus whatever the cash flow difference for the lease payment versus the interest payment, right? So it is 7,000 minus the 90, right? The 90 is the difference in the monthly payment. And so then we can say, okay, what is the value of all of these things, all these cash flow differences between the two, right? So this would be, again, the future value, right? And so we're going to say it is equal to that times 1 plus the monthly interest rate raised to the power of 36 minus the time. Right, and we're going to fix this reference. And go down. sum. And so the difference in our future value is 620 bucks. Now, you might notice that this is the same as the difference between the two individual future values. Right? So we can do either look at the cash flow differences, or we can look at them individually and then compare, and we'll get exactly the same result. And so sometimes you're going to see, if you like look around that, the way to compare different alternatives, like look at the cash flow differences and see what happens. But I think looking at them individually, it's a lot clearer like what's actually going on with our decision. Right? At least I hope. Does anyone have any questions? Right, so if we want to complicate this, we could like add like whatever different extra maintenance we may have to do, or any other factors we want. We could see how they're going to affect our cash flows if we do that or that. Right? In this case, we have a relatively straight, like simple, straightforward cash flow that we expect, and that's what happens. This is a very similar idea to what we might do if we're deciding to buy a house or rent an apartment, right? We have certain streams of cash flows that we'll have to make if we rent. We have certain other streams of cash flows that we'll have to make if we buy, right? There are a lot of other considerations that enter it, because if we buy, we have a lot of rent, like various maintenance activities, we have property taxes, like different utility payments between an apartment and a house. So there's a lot of differences in there that we have to account for in our stream of cash flow. We have a large residual value at the end when we sell the house, then we don't have anything in the front. But a lot of it depends again on the rate on the investment return, right? Because if we do not have to spend all that money on the house, we would be investing it somewhere else, right? So again, depending on the numbers that you have, depending on what the real research shows to you, like what your housing price and mortgage rates, etc., are going to be, you don't know what's going to be better for you. But in order to make that decision, you need to do the analysis, right? You can just say, well, it seems like this would be better, right? Because if you look at it, there's a lot of stuff going on here, right? You have to think of investment returns, the timing of the cash flows, and the residual value. Like it all has to come together at the end for you to make a correct decision, right? All right. So this will be it for today, I presume. It's about 12:04. I guess I'll post the homework on the stuff that we discussed since then, give you some stuff to play with. And now, one thing I want to mention is that we have spring break coming up, right? So you guys will enjoy a week off or something. So one thing, please do not forget to send me your research paper outlines, all right? So hopefully before spring break, because that means if you guys want to be productive during spring break, I know you're working on something, right? And another thing, we will not have class on Tuesday after the spring break, right? So on Tuesday after spring break, we'll have no class. So I guess you can use that time to work on your homework assignments or your research paper, or you can just hang out.